When my daughter got divorced, my daughter-in-law scoffed. It's no surprise she could never truly satisfy a man. Several relatives nodded their agreement. My grandson chimed in, some women are just born to be failures. Then my 8-year-old granddaughter walked up to her and said, Grandma, I've recorded something special. She tapped the screen of her tablet, and my daughter-in-law froze. Stay with this story until the very last moment. The ending will astonish you. After you've seen it, let me know what you do in my place. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has traveled. I sat in the crowded living room. The sounds of laughter and conversation seemed like endless music, but my heart was heavy and there were 3 of us, myself, Emily, Miss, and my little granddaughter, Count Lucy, as if we had been pushed into a corner of the world, huddled near the old wooden table at the back of the room. The curious stares of the relatives, the forced smiles of the guests, it all felt like invisible needles pricking my skin. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. The house, once filled with laughter during the holidays, now had a strange atmosphere. Everyone was trying to appear cheerful, but I knew that behind the greetings were whispers about Emily, about her broken marriage, about the days of suffering she had endured. I took Emily's hand under the table. It was ice cold. Her thin fingers squeezed mine tightly, as if trying to cling to a fragile hope. Lucy, my little granddaughter of barely 8 years, sat next to her mother, hugging her tablet as if it were her only friend in that room. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed, cutting through all the commotion, the crisp clink of crystal glasses as sharp as a knife. I looked up and felt my heart sink as I saw Veronica, my daughter-in-law, stand up in the middle of the dining table. In her hand, she held a glass of red wine that gleamed under the chandelier light, highlighting the cold smile on her meticulously made-up face. Veronica always knew how to draw all eyes, and today was no exception. Everyone, let's raise our glasses, she announced. Her voice was sharp yet full of confidence, like a host about to start a big show. A toast to Emily, this brave woman. It's no surprise, though. She never knew how to satisfy a real man. The entire room fell silent, an awkward, dense silence, as if the air itself had evaporated. I felt the blood boil in my veins, but I held back, knowing that if I spoke now, everything would only get worse. Some relatives close to Veronica, like Aunt Yacinthe Carol and Uncle Terence Frank, nodded their heads, feigning understanding, but I saw the falsehood in their eyes. The others just exchanged furtive glances, not daring to speak, as if they feared being dragged into a war they wanted no part of. I looked at Emily. Her face was ashen. Her eyes were red-rimmed, trying to hold back tears. Her head bowed over a plate of nearly untouched food. Her fingers, hidden under the table, trembled uncontrollably, as if desperately clinging to the last shred of strength. I squeezed her hand tighter, wanting to give her some warmth, some strength, but inside, I felt nothing but agonizing helplessness. Emily, my daughter, whom I had raised with all my love, was now being ridiculed by her own family. Not satisfied. Mason, Veronica's 14-year-old son, immediately joined his mother. His voice was arrogant, a miniature version of the cruelty she was displaying. Mom is totally right. Some women are born failures. They couldn't keep their husbands, and now they come crawling back to live off others. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. Mason's words were like a sharp knife cutting directly into my heart. A few cousins sitting nearby snickered quietly. That cruel sound drove the knife deeper into Emily's pain. I watched my daughter bite her lip hard, trying not to let the tears escape. But her shoulders trembled repeatedly as if her whole body was silently screaming. Lucy, sitting next to her mother, looked up at me. In her eyes shone a sadness I couldn't bear. She was too young to witness this, too young to understand why her mother was being treated this way. I wanted to get up, to shout, to defend my daughter, but I knew that if I did, Veronica would only feel more emboldened. She was always like this, always looking to turn everything into a stage for her cruelty. And just as I imagined, Veronica wasn't satisfied yet. She walked towards our table, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, each step a declaration of war. She leaned in, her eyes fixed on Emily, cold as if they wanted to pierce her soul. "You're regretting it now, aren't you?" Veronica said in a sweet but poisoned voice. "Regretting sticking with a drunk gambler instead of listening to your family? Or not?" The air in the room grew heavy. The few sounds of cutlery hitting plates faded completely. All eyes fell on Emily, but she just lowered her head in silence. The first tears streamed down her cheeks, falling onto the table and soaking the white napkin. My chest tightened. I wanted to hug my daughter to protect her, but all I could do was squeeze her hand tightly, telling her with that gesture that I was there, that I would never abandon her. Emily burst into tears, small, contained sobs, as if she feared crying louder would make everything worse. The pain was choking me. My daughter, whom I had loved and cared for all these years, was having her pride crushed by her own family. I wanted to get up and tell Veronica to shut up, but I knew it would only make Emily feel more humiliated. In that instant, Lucy, my little granddaughter, took a deep breath. Until then, she had remained silent, hugging the tablet against her chest, as if it were her only shield. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with something stronger, as if she had gathered all the courage an 8-year-old girl could possess. I looked at her, my heart pounding, not understanding what was about to happen. Lucy suddenly stood up. Her small but firm legs carried her until she stood in front of Veronica. Her clear, childish but firm voice resonated through the room, leaving everyone frozen. "Grandma, I have something very special I want to show everyone." All eyes turned to Lucy. The room fell into absolute silence, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. I looked at my granddaughter, my heart hammering in my chest. Lucy placed the tablet on the table. Her little fingers trembled, but they moved with determination, ready to press the button. The screen lit up. Murmurs began at the table, but I heard nothing. The only thing I felt was my own heart beating loudly like a drum. The memories took me back to that rainy afternoon when I sat by the old wooden kitchen table, playing with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Suddenly, the phone on the table vibrated forcefully, breaking the silence. I jumped and quickly picked it up. Emily's name, my youngest daughter, whom I love more than life itself, appeared on the screen. But when I brought the phone to my ear, the voice on the other end wasn't her usual cheerful and lively one, but a broken, choked sound, as if her entire world was crumbling. "Mom, I can't take it anymore." I remained silent, my heart tight, as if someone was wringing it. Emily's voice was interspersed with uncontrollable sobs. Through the phone, I heard the sound of glasses and plates breaking, as if a storm was tearing through the small apartment where she lived. Emily began to speak, each word like a knife plunging into my chest. She told me about her miserable husband, the one I had warned her about since they first started dating. He spent his days drowned in alcohol, laughing with his friends while leaving his wife and daughter abandoned in that cramped apartment. The little money Emily earned working as a waitress in a small diner, he spent it all on gambling and games, leaving debts that she had to bear alone. And on the nights he returned drunk, he would shout and break things like a wild beast, ignoring the terrified look in Lucy, her little daughter's eyes. "Tell me whether you have parents, grandparents, or older family members who deserve more respect than they currently receive from their families. Alternatively, tell me if you yourself are going through a situation in which you're not appreciated as much as you truly deserve." But what destroyed me most was when Emily told me about that cursed night. She caught him holding hands with another woman in the same bar, as always. "I was there, Mom," Emily sobbed, like an idiot watching him hug her, laughing as if he never had a wife or daughter. "I didn't know what to do, Mom. I just ran home, hugged Lucy, and cried." I heard Lucy's voice in the distance, weak but filled with panic. "Mom, I'm scared." That little voice was another dagger straight to my heart. Lucy, my granddaughter, barely 8 years old, was already witnessing things no child should ever see. I imagined her small face, those big eyes that always shone, now surely clouded with fear. I wanted to scream, to run there and pull them both out of that hell. but all I could do was squeeze the phone tightly, trying to keep the calm in my voice. Emily, listen to me, I told her, swallowing the lump in my throat. Bring Lucy with you right now. Come home to me, to your brother. Our house will always be your refuge. Do you understand? There was silence. Only choked sobs were heard on the other end of the line. Suddenly, I heard a door slam so hard it startled me. And then my daughter's voice, weak but firm, whispered, I'm coming. I can't stay here another second. I hung up the phone, but my hands were still trembling. I got up, walked to the window, and watched the rain fall with a heavy heart. So many memories flooded back. The days when Emily was a little girl, when she ran after me in the backyard, laughing heartily, her eyes shining like stars. She had been my pride, an intelligent, sweet young woman, always knowing how to make others smile. But then she fell in love. She fell deeply in love with someone who didn't deserve her, ignoring all my advice and that of her brother, and Alex. I tried to stop her. I tried to tell her that this man wouldn't bring her happiness, but Emily just smiled, took my hand, and said, Mom, I think he will change. And now my daughter was paying for that trust with wounds in her soul that might never heal. That night, when the doorbell rang, I ran to open the door, my heart pounding. It was still raining, it was cold, and there was Emily, stumbling, tightly hugging Lucy. Both were drenched. Rainwater ran down Emily's pale face. Lucy, small and trembling, pressed against her mother, her big eyes looking at me as if asking for help. All their possessions barely fit into a few old, torn plastic bags with some clothes and a few personal items. Emily, Lucy, come in, my dears, I said, my voice hoarse with emotion. I quickly grabbed a towel to dry my granddaughter, feeling her small body shiver under the thin clothes. Emily collapsed onto the living room sofa, her shoulders shaken with silent sobs. I saw her trying to hold back, trying not to let Lucy see her weakness, but the tears ran nonetheless, soaking her blouse. Lucy let go of her mother, ran to hug me, and wrapped her small arms around my waist. Grandma, Mom is very tired, she whispered with that innocent but worried voice. I crouched down, hugged her tight, and felt the warmth of her body like a ray of light in the midst of the storm that was ravaging my family. It's okay, my love, I said, though I wasn't even sure my words were strong enough to ease her pain. I'm here. I will take care of both of you. Outside, the rain continued to fall. I stood there for a moment, knowing that from that instant, the storm in my family was just beginning. The next morning, Emily and I tidied up her old room on the ground floor. I swept the floor while she carefully opened a small suitcase and took out some worn clothes, placing them in an old wooden wardrobe. All her belongings fit into 2 torn plastic bags, a few pieces of clothing, some of Lucy's toys, and a picture frame with a photo of the 3 of them in happier times. Seeing my daughter arranging her things, I felt a knot in my heart. That was all that remained of a marriage in which she had placed all her faith. Lucy sat on the edge of the bed, hugging a faded rag doll. She tucked it onto the pillow and whispered to it like a friend. From now on, we'll live here. Don't be afraid. Grandma and Mom will be with us. Her voice sounded tender but firm, as if she were trying to give herself courage. I looked at her, my soul shrinking. An 8-year-old girl who should only be thinking about playing and studying now had to learn to face the wounds that adults had left behind. Emily drew back the curtain and the light came in, illuminating her drawn face. Mom, this room is the same as before, she said in a husky voice, forcing a smile. I miss the days when you taught me to embroider in that corner. I nodded, but I didn't dare look her in the eyes, afraid she would discover the sadness in mine. Yes, honey, I replied softly. Everything will be fine. I'm going to help you start over. But I knew things weren't that simple. This house, although it was the place where I raised my children, was no longer the quiet refuge it once was. Veronica, my daughter-in-law, always carried an arrogance and coldness with her, as if she were the sole owner of the house. I had seen the way she treated those she disliked and knew that Emily and Lucy's return would be the perfect excuse for her to unleash all her malice. At noon, as I was helping Emily clean the small table in the room, Veronica came down the stairs. The clicking of her heels echoed loudly on the wood. Each step was like a declaration of war. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, her eyes sweeping the room with impossible-to-hide contempt. She said mockingly, This place used to be a storage room, and now it turns out to be a free guest room. I saw Emily bite her lips hard, her head down, unable to respond. Her hands squeezed the cleaning cloth until her knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream to tell her to shut up, but I knew it would only make Emily feel more ashamed. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice firm. "It's just temporary, Veronica," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "Emily needs time to get back on her feet." Veronica shrugged, offered a freezing smile, and turned away, but not before delivering a cutting remark. "As long as they don't get in my way, it's fine." Her words were like a knife, not just for Emily, but for me too, making my heart bleed. I watched her walk away, suppressing the rage that burned within me. This was my house, the place I built with sweat and tears, and yet I had to watch my daughter be treated like an intruder. That afternoon, as the sunlight began to fade, Lucy was sitting on the old sofa in the living room, carefully coloring in her notebook. She was so focused, her little hands holding the pencil as she drew bright flowers as if trying to create a different, pain-free world. But then Mason, Veronica's son, walked in. The boy, barely 14, already had his mother's arrogance. He planted himself in front of Lucy. "This sofa is my house's," he said with a harsh voice and a sharp gaze. "Who gave you permission to sit here?" Lucy started. Her big eyes widened with fear. She pressed the notebook against her chest, as if afraid he would snatch away that small refuge too. Emily, who was folding clothes in her room, rushed out when she heard the noise and hugged her daughter. "Lucy, come to the room with me," she said with a trembling voice, trying to sound calm. I approached and spoke firmly to Mason. "You need to show respect to your aunt and your cousin." But he just scoffed with disdain, his eyes full of defiance. "Everyone says they're visitors, but they stay as if they own the place," he replied, and went upstairs to his room with heavy footsteps that made the wood rumble, as if he was releasing his fury. I stood motionless, feeling helplessness engulf me. Mason was just a kid, but he had already learned to hurt others, following his mother's example. I looked at Lucy, who was taking refuge in Emily's arms. Her eyes shone, though without shedding tears. The strength of that girl filled me with pride, and at the same time broke my heart. That night, dinner felt as heavy as a funeral. I sat at the head of the table, trying to keep the meal calm, but every glance, every gesture was loaded with an impossible-to-hide tension. Emily and Lucy huddled together in the corner, eating in silence, as if they feared the slightest noise would attract attention. Veronica, in contrast, calmly served her plate, with that cold smile she always wore. Suddenly, as if remembering something, she looked up and eyed me with a fake sincerity. "My husband is almost back from his business trip," she said in a flat tone, but full of intent. "Mom, make sure Emily keeps everything clean. This house can't look like a junk storage unit." Her words were like a direct blow to Emily's face. I saw my daughter lower her head, her chopsticks paused mid-air. Lucy took her hand, and her small eyes sought mine as if asking for help. I wanted to stand up and yell at Veronica, but I knew doing so would only humiliate Emily more. So I just nodded, responding dryly, "I'll tell her." The table was plunged into a frozen silence, broken only by the metallic sound of cutlery against plates. In the days following Emily and Lucy's return, my house seemed shrouded in an invisible fog, dense and suffocating. Each day was a test of endurance, as if Veronica and Mason had made it their mission to make Emily and her daughter's life an endless torment. Emily tried to adjust to the household routine, but I saw the fatigue etched on her face. In silence, she did everything, washing clothes, cleaning the kitchen, sweeping the patio, as if trying to prove that she wasn't the parasite Veronica accused her of being. But no matter how hard she tried, in Veronica's eyes, she remained a shadow, someone despicable without a right to respect. I watched her hurrying about from early morning, her thin hands reddened by the cold water, and my heart ached. I wanted to tell her to stop, to rest, but every time I opened my mouth, Emily shook her head and smiled weakly. "Mom, I have to do something. I can't stand being idle." One morning, when the sun was barely piercing the branches in the yard, I saw Emily hanging clothes on the line, each item carefully folded, even though they were worn and nearly torn. Veronica came out with a cup of coffee in her hand, with the air of a lady checking on the servants. She stopped, raised her chin, and spoke coldly to Emily. Separate your clothes and your daughter's. I don't want my family's clothes mixing with those of outsiders. She emphasized outsiders, like a stab in Emily's wound. From the kitchen door, I saw Emily bite her lips, her hand still mid-gesture. She didn't respond. She just nodded silently and went to find another tub to separate the clothes. I felt my insides burn. Veronica not only wanted to humiliate her, but also make it clear that she had no place in this house. I wanted to go over, say something in her defense, but I knew I would only make Emily feel more ashamed. I stood there, gripping the rag in my hands, restraining the rage that boiled in my chest. Lucy, my little granddaughter, was also not spared from Mason's hidden stabs. The boy, barely 14 but with the malice inherited from his mother, always looked for ways to bother Lucy. One day I saw her sitting in a corner of the patio, carefully arranging her favorite crayon case. But when I came back, the case had disappeared. Mason was a few steps away, laughing with his neighborhood friends. If anyone needs crayons, look for them in the trash. Some kid out there is just throwing things everywhere. Lucy heard him. Her big eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just quietly ran to the trash can behind the house. She picked up the pencils that had been thrown away one by one. Her little hands got dirty, but she still tried to clean them carefully. Another time, while Lucy was doing homework at the dining room table, Mason accidentally spilled a glass of soda over her notebooks. The liquid soaked the pages, blurring the letters she had written so painstakingly. The boy shrugged, smirked, and said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you sitting there." Lucy didn't say anything. She just lowered her head and quietly gathered the soaked pages with trembling hands. I wanted to scream at Mason. I wanted to teach him a lesson. But from afar, I saw Emily's pleading look, as if saying, "Mom, let me handle it." Swallowing my rage, I remained silent, though my heart broke to see my granddaughter endure things she didn't deserve. What caught my attention was that after every humiliation, Lucy didn't cry or complain. She simply took out her tablet, sat in a corner, and slid her fingers across the screen as if she were recording something. I managed to hear her whisper to herself in a low but firm voice, "Everyone will find out." I didn't know what she was doing, but in her eyes, though still childlike, shone a determination I'd never seen in an 8-year-old girl. My chest tightened with a mixture of worry and pride. Lucy was small, but I knew she had a strength that would one day change everything. One weekend night, when some relatives came to visit, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy again. I'd hoped for a warm evening where we could all talk peacefully, but Veronica, as always, turned everything into a stage for her drama. Sitting at the head of the table while serving herself food, she spoke in a tone that was half joke, half truth, but with a cold look toward Emily. "You see, when a woman chooses the wrong husband, her life is ruined. Emily is a crystal clear example. She brought the misfortune on herself." My sister-in-law, Carol, who was close to Veronica, let out an awkward giggle as if trying to relieve the tension. Uncle Frank nodded his head, feigning agreement, although I knew he did it only to avoid trouble. Emily was in the corner of the table, her face down, gripping the edge of her blouse until her knuckles were white from the effort, trying to hide her reddened eyes. I watched her force herself to swallow every bite, as if stopping meant the tears would escape uncontrollably. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if someone was forcefully squeezing it. I wanted to stand up and defend her, but I knew that if I did, Veronica would feel more powerful. I couldn't take it anymore and banged my chopsticks hard on the table. "Enough, Veronica," I shouted in a low but firm voice. "Eat your food." My voice trembled, not with fear, but with accumulated rage. Veronica twisted her mouth into a defiant smile, but said nothing more. I thought she had stopped until I saw Mason, sitting next to Lucy, nudge her and whisper loudly enough for only her to hear. "Did you hear? Your mom is a failure and you're nothing but a burden." Lucy trembled. Her small hand squeezed the edge of the table tightly. I thought she was going to cry, that she would run out as she had before, but this time she didn't. Instead, she silently pulled the tablet from under her chair, placed it on her lap, and her fingers moved quickly across the screen. I managed to notice what my granddaughter was doing, and suddenly my heart tightened. Lucy was doing something I couldn't understand at that moment, but I felt she was preparing for something much bigger than any of us could imagine. A week after the tense days, Veronica suddenly proposed organizing a family party. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in my hand when she walked in with a smile on her lips, both false and calculating. Mom, I think we should organize a party, she said in a sweet voice, but with an icy look, to celebrate Alex's return from his business trip and also to give the family a warm atmosphere. After all, we're still successful, aren't we? We can't let Emily's situation extinguish our joy, can we? I was surprised, not by the idea of the party, but by the way Veronica said the name Emily, as if my daughter's name were a stain that needed to be erased. At 6'7", I had learned to read people, and I knew Veronica wasn't simply trying to organize a party. She was setting up a stage where she could continue to trample on Emily's dignity in front of everyone. I just nodded and replied curtly, "Whatever you want." But inside, I felt a storm brewing. Veronica immediately started preparing everything. She called everyone she knew, inviting even distant relatives who rarely came. By chance, I overheard her conversation with Mason in the living room when she whispered mockingly, "We'll see how long they last in this show." Mason let out a loud laugh. His voice sounded full of enthusiasm. "Don't worry, Mom. I know what to do to make them die of shame." The words of those two pierced my heart like needles. I stayed still behind the door, my hands clenched until they hurt, but I knew it wasn't the time to confront them yet. I had to protect Emily and Lucy, and that required keeping calm. The morning of the party, I woke up early, trying to get everything in order around the house. Emily, as always, wanted to help in the kitchen, but Veronica pushed her away with a gesture and a fake tone. "Go rest, Emily. If the guests see you, they'll think I'm working you too hard. Better sit in a corner." Her words sounded kind, but I clearly saw her intention, to turn Emily into a pitiful ornament, someone adrift that everyone could whisper about. Emily just lowered her head, nodded in silence, and retreated to her room, taking Lucy by the hand. I looked at my daughter, and pain pierced my soul. Emily had been a radiant young woman with a smile that lit up the whole house. Now she was nothing more than a shadow of herself, with a drawn face and fragile shoulders carrying a sky full of sadness. I wanted to hug her, to tell her that her mother would always be there, but I knew those words of comfort could no longer alleviate the pain she carried inside. Lucy, my little granddaughter, was running back and forth, helping me set the table, carefully arranging each white napkin. Despite being only 8, she had already learned to do everything gently, as if she feared the slightest noise would attract someone's attention. I stroked her soft hair and smiled. "You've been very good, Lucy." She looked up with her big, bright eyes. "Grandma, my mom won't be sad tonight, will she?" I had a lump in my throat, not knowing what to answer. I just nodded slightly, hoping my words wouldn't be an empty promise. But then Mason appeared. The boy passed me and forcefully pushed the stack of porcelain plates I had just placed on the table. The sound of breakage echoed, and the white pieces scattered all over the floor. Lucy jumped, hugging the napkins tightly, her face pale. Mason immediately turned around, pointed at her, and said mockingly, "Look at that, so clumsy, and she still wants to help around the house, useless." I didn't manage to say anything when Veronica intervened with a cold voice. "If children are clumsy, they should accept their mistake. Adults don't need to defend them." I felt the blood boil in my veins. "Mason, you broke the plates. How can you blame your cousin?" I yelled, my voice trembling with rage. But the boy just shrugged, let out a sarcastic laugh, and walked away with heavy steps, leaving Lucy standing there, her small hands trembling as she picked up the broken pieces. Emily rushed out, hugged her daughter, and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mom will take care of it." But I saw something different in the girl's eyes. It wasn't fear, but a strange firmness, as if she were silently preparing for something. In the afternoon, the guests began to arrive. Outside, I heard laughter and lively conversations, but inside me, everything felt heavy. Emily was wearing an old blue dress, the same one she wore at her wedding almost 10 years ago. Although worn, it was still the prettiest thing she owned. She forced herself to smile and greet people, but I noticed the strain in every gesture. Veronica, on the other hand, wore a new, elegant dress, meticulously made up, strolling among the guests like a distinguished hostess. She laughed and chatted with everyone, but her eyes occasionally lingered on Emily, as if wanting to remind everyone that my daughter was nothing more than a failure. Mason, as always, strutted around, showing off to the other children in the family. I heard him say with an arrogant voice, "Someday this whole house will be my parents' and mine. Lucy is just squatting here. Sooner or later, they'll kick her out." His words were like a knife straight to my heart. I wanted to run and slap him so he would learn respect. But Emily, who was nearby, simply drew Lucy closer, whispering, "Hold on, honey, don't listen to him." I looked at my daughter and saw her red-rimmed eyes, although she continued to force a smile. Lucy squeezed her mother's hand tightly and tense, but she also held on to the tablet she always carried. That gesture made me shudder. Despite her young age, she seemed to be plotting something, and I could feel a strange strength emanating from my granddaughter. The room, which moments before was full of laughter and conversations, suddenly felt choked by an indescribable tension. I was sitting in the corner of the table, squeezing Emily's hand, feeling her cold fingers tremble repeatedly. I've faced many storms in my life, but I had never felt as powerless as I did at that moment, watching my daughter and granddaughter become objects of ridicule right in the house I built with my sweat and tears. The trivial family chatter, the obligatory smiles, everything only made my chest feel heavier, as if a storm was about to break. Veronica used a teaspoon to gently tap the rim of her wine glass. The metallic sound resonated crisply, abruptly cutting off all murmurs. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. I watched Veronica's meticulously painted lips twist into a cold smile, as if she were about to deliver the final blow. "Tonight," she began in a shrill but confident voice, "let's toast to a very expensive marriage lesson." What a shame that Emily, my dear sister-in-law, is the protagonist of this lesson in failure. Now she's come back empty-handed and with extra baggage. Her words were like bullets dipped in sugar, sweet but poisonous, fired directly at Emily's heart. Murmurs were heard around the table. Some relatives close to Veronica laughed quietly, as if it were just an innocent joke. But I saw the cruelty clearly in her eyes, the way she watched Emily, making sure every word pierced my daughter's pride. Other distant relatives looked away uncomfortably, not daring to say anything, as if they feared being caught in a war they wanted to avoid. I looked at Emily. Her face was pale. Her red-rimmed eyes were fixed on the almost untouched plate. Her hands squeezed the worn fabric of her blue dress so hard her knuckles were white. Her lips trembled as if she were fighting to hold back tears. My heart was crushed. Emily, the daughter I had raised with all my love, was now having her dignity trampled on by her own family. I wanted to get up and yell at Veronica, but I knew it would only make my daughter feel even more humiliated. I simply took her hand more firmly, trying to convey a little warmth, a little strength to resist that moment, but Veronica didn't stop. She approached our table, her heels striking the hardwood floor, each step like a declaration of war. "Emily," she said with a sweet but mocking tone, "you must regret it, right? You regret choosing a man who was worthless, and now you have to come back here to live off your brother's charity." She paused, tilted her head, her eyes as if they wanted to pierce Emily's soul. "But relax, this family is always generous. Even if you're a nuisance, we'll still take you in." The entire room was enveloped in an uncomfortable silence. The faint sound of cutlery clinking against plates died away completely. I felt the blood boil in my veins. "Enough, Veronica!" I slammed my hand on the table and stood up. My voice trembled with rage. The sound echoed like thunder, making some people jump. But Veronica just looked at me without losing her smile, her eyes defiant. "Mother-in-law, don't get upset," she said in a cold, even tone. "Think clearly. This house is already in Alex's name. Legally, you have no more rights to it than anyone else. It's not yours." Her words were like a direct punch to my face. The room filled with murmurs again. Some relatives nodded as if accepting what she said as truth. I stood there paralyzed, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. This house, the place I'd sweated and cried to build, was now being used by her as a weapon to humiliate me and my daughter. I wanted to answer. I wanted to scream that it was still my home, that I still had rights, but my throat closed up and I couldn't utter a word. Right at that moment, Mason, Veronica's 14-year-old son, seized the opportunity to chime in. The boy laughed disdainfully with an arrogant tone that sounded like a miniature copy of his mother. "Failure women like Emily's mom are just born to be abandoned. Lucy is a burden too, isn't she, Mom?" Laughter erupted from the corner of the table where several family children were sitting. That cruel sound pierced Emily and Lucy's pain like sharp knives. I saw Emily lower her head. Tears fell silently onto the table, soaking the white napkin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to protect my daughter and granddaughter. But before I could do anything, Lucy, my small granddaughter, suddenly stood up with a start. Her eyes were full of tears, but her voice was clear and firm, resounding in the silent room. Grandma, I have something very special I want to show everyone. The whole room froze. Record? What thing? A relative murmured curiously. I stood still, watching my granddaughter, my heart pounding in my chest. Lucy, only 8 years old, was standing there, small but determined, like a warrior about to enter battle. She took the tablet from her pocket and walked to the center of the room. The light from the screen illuminated her sweet face, which was full of determination. Veronica, with that false smile still plastered on her lips, tilted her head and said mockingly, "Oh, it's just kid stuff. Probably some silly game." But I saw her grip the wine glass until her fingers were white from the effort, and a flicker of worry, which she tried to hide, lit up her gaze. I approached Lucy, placed my hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "Are you sure, Lucy?" She looked up at me with eyes shining with a firmness I'd never seen in an 8-year-old. She nodded forcefully, without hesitation, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I took a deep breath, trying to contain the surge of nerves rising in my chest. Lucy connected the tablet to the television and the big screen lit up, drawing all eyes in the room. The first video appeared. The image was slightly blurry, but the sound was sharp, cutting like a knife. Veronica's sharp, harsh voice boomed, slicing through the air. "That brat Emily is nothing but a parasite. Having her here only makes this house dirtier." The entire table froze. The uncomfortable murmurs suddenly ceased, replaced by looks of astonishment and bewilderment. Aunt Carol, who always agreed with everything Veronica said, put her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide open. Uncle Frank, sitting in the corner, stopped mid-sip, the glass trembling in his hand. I looked at Emily and saw her clutch my sleeve, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her eyes were no longer fixed on the floor. Instead, I noticed a faint sparkle, as if she were slowly regaining some of her strength. The next video appeared, this time showing Mason in the backyard, showing off to his friends. The boy's voice sounded arrogant and cruel. "This house, sooner or later, will all be mine. And that Lucy is nothing. They'll kick her out eventually." His friends' laughter erupted in the video like sharp cuts plunging into my heart. I saw Emily burst into tears, her shoulders trembled, but she still hugged me tightly as if seeking support to keep from collapsing. Lucy stood in front of the screen. She didn't turn to look at her mother, but I could see her small shoulders shaking, as if she were trying to contain her own emotions. Uncle Frank slammed his hand on the table, his face darkened, and his grave voice, full of fury, thundered, "What a disgrace, a child saying such things." Aunt Carol muttered sarcastically to those next to her, "I knew it. A daughter-in-law like Veronica only knows how to put others down to elevate herself." The murmurs began to spread through the room, and little by little, all the looks of suspicion and contempt turned towards Veronica. She was still there, but her fake smile had vanished. In its place was a pale face and hands that gripped the glass so tightly I feared it would shatter. The video continued relentlessly. This time it showed Veronica in the living room, talking on the phone with a friend. Her voice sounded cold, calculating. "That old woman doesn't have much left to give. The important thing is to make sure we get to keep this house." Those words exploded like a bomb in the room. Everyone turned to look at me, their eyes filled with indignation and compassion. I remained there, paralyzed, feeling as if the floor were spinning beneath my feet. Veronica, the daughter-in-law I trusted, whom I had come to love like a daughter, turned out to be planning to take everything I had built in my life. Veronica's face was now as white as a sheet. She suddenly stood up and ran toward the television to turn it off, but Lucy was faster. The girl planted herself in front of the screen, small but firm, and her clear voice resonated. "It's not over yet." The girl's courage left everyone stunned. I looked at her and felt a painful pride wash over me. She, at only 8 years old, was doing what neither I, as a mother and grandmother, had dared to do. Unmask the truth. The final video, the most devastating, appeared on the screen. It showed Veronica in the bedroom, whispering to Mason, "Do whatever you can to make them uncomfortable, so those two feel so ashamed they'll leave quickly." Her voice sounded cold, calculating, like someone outlining a perfect plan to kick Emily and Lucy out of the house. Mason nodded with a malicious grin. Don't worry, Mom, I know what to do. The entire room erupted in indignant murmurs. Some relatives stood up, pointing at Veronica with looks of contempt. That woman has no conscience, shouted a distant aunt. How can she treat her sister-in-law like that? I turned to Emily and saw her hugging Lucy tightly, her whole body trembling, but not with fear. In her eyes was a spark, a liberation that had been contained for a long time. Lucy, standing in front of the screen, lifted her head proudly, with a luminous strength in her gaze. The little girl, although fragile, had done what none of us dared to do: unmask the truth. The video ended, a deathly silence fell over the room. Neither the clinking of cutlery nor a murmur could be heard. Everything seemed frozen, only the sound of everyone's heavy breathing remained. Then, Veronica dropped the wine glass she was holding. The pieces of glass shattered on the floor, sounding like a final declaration of the end of her pretense. Her face was as pale as a corpse. Her desperate wide eyes searched for an exit, but she couldn't find one. Just at the most tense moment, when the indignant whispers of the family were still resonating, the front door burst open. Alex, my son, walked in with his suitcase still in his hand, his face tired after a long business trip. He looked up. His gaze swept over the crowded room and stopped at the scene in front of him. Emily crying inconsolably, Lucy hugging her mother tightly, and Veronica paralyzed in the middle of the room, her face as pale as a ghost. "What's going on here? Why is everyone gathered?" he asked in a surprised voice, but with a hint of worry. No one answered immediately. All eyes turned to Alex as if he were the only one capable of breaking that suffocating silence. I walked forward, placed my hand on my son's shoulder, and said, my voice hoarse with emotion, "Alex, son, you finally came back at the right time." I pointed to the television screen where the last image of the video remained, frozen like an undeniable accusation. A kind-hearted relative, my cousin Eleanor, quickly explained to him in a low, trembling voice, "Look, Alex, it's all there. What Veronica and Mason said. What they did." She pointed towards the television where Lucy's video had just ended, leaving the entire room in a state of shock. Alex fixed his eyes on Veronica. His gaze turned cold, as if all the emotions inside him were freezing. "What is this?" he asked in a grave, cutting voice. Each word was like a stab. Veronica stammered, trying to appear calm, but her hands were trembling. The broken glass on the floor shimmered in pieces, proof of her collapse. "Honey, it's just a children's prank. They made it all up," she said in a weak voice, desperate to find an escape. But Uncle Frank, always so quiet, slammed his hand on the table and his voice boomed firmly. "They didn't make up anything. We all heard it. We saw it clearly." He pointed at Veronica, his look full of contempt. "She insulted your sister. She insulted your mother, right here in this house." Alex froze. His eyes shifted from Veronica to Emily and then stopped on Lucy. He approached his sister, his voice softer but still trembling. "Emily, little sister, is all this true?" Emily just sobbed, unable to answer. Her shoulders shook in my arms. But Lucy, my little granddaughter, was the one who spoke for her mother. The girl took a step forward, tiny but determined. Her clear voice resonated in the room. "It's all true, Uncle Alex. I recorded everything. My mom didn't lie." Lucy's words were like a strong wind that dispelled the last doubts. Alex's face flushed. The veins in his temples stood out. He turned abruptly toward Veronica, and his voice roared with fury, echoing throughout the room. "Veronica, all these years I trusted you. I thought you were a good wife, a good mother, and you dare to humiliate my sister, my mother, right here in our house?" Veronica sank into the chair, starting the tearful drama I knew too well. "Honey, you misunderstood me. I only wanted the best for the family," she sobbed, trying to cling to Alex's sleeve. "It wasn't my intention." But Alex pulled his hand away, his gaze icy. "Shut up already," he shouted, and the echo of his voice shook the entire room. "I don't want to hear any more lies. You have betrayed this entire family." Mason, seeing his mother being scolded, immediately jumped in, his voice full of anger. "Dad, Mom just wanted the best for the family. Why are you defending outsiders?" His words added fuel to the fire. Alex spun around to face his son, his gaze as sharp as a razor. And you, Mason? From today on, you are not allowed to disrespect your grandmother or your aunt. You will learn again what it means to be a decent person. And this time, I won't forgive anything. He slammed his hand on the table with a firm, cold voice. Tomorrow, I will talk to the lawyer. If we can't live in peace, then divorce is the only way out. Alex's declaration fell like thunder, making the entire room explode with tension. Some relatives hurriedly stood up, muttering excuses to leave as if they didn't want to get caught in the storm that had just erupted. Veronica slumped in the chair, her face pale, tears streaming down. But no one believed her performance anymore. I stood there hugging Emily and Lucy tightly, with a mixture of relief and pain. Emily embraced her daughter, murmuring through tears. Everything finally came to light. Her voice was weak, but it carried a ray of hope, a liberation she had contained for so long. Lucy, in her mother's arms, looked up at me, her eyes shining with pride. "Grandma, I did well, didn't I?" she asked in an innocent but confident voice. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You are your grandmother's pride, Lucy." The room, after Alex's thundering declaration, remained in indescribable chaos. The relatives' murmurs, the looks of rage and shame, everything mingled in an atmosphere so dense it felt impossible to breathe. Veronica remained slumped in the chair, tears running down her made-up face. But no one believed her anymore. Mason muttered curses, angrily hitting the floor, his eyes full of defiance. Emily and Lucy were huddled in the corner of the table. The girl's eyes shone with pride while Emily hugged her tightly, as if she were her only support. I was still there, my heart heavy yet relieved. Heavy because my family, to whom I dedicated my whole life, was about to break apart. Relieved because the truth had finally come out, thanks to the courage of Lucy, my small but brave granddaughter. But I knew the story couldn't end there. There was something I had kept silent about for many years, and now, at this moment, the time had come to speak. I slowly stood up, walked to the center of the room, and placed my cold teacup on the table with a soft clack, just enough to catch everyone's attention. All eyes turned to me, from Alex, his face still tense, to Veronica, with her red-rimmed eyes, and even the relatives, who were trying to hide their curiosity. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my chest, bringing with it the determination I had forged over the years. "There's something else I've never told anyone," I began in a serene voice, but full of force, as if wanting to engrave every word in everyone's mind. "Besides this house, the one that is in Alex's name, I still have another estate." The room immediately erupted with exclamations of surprise. Veronica instantly stopped crying. She abruptly raised her head, her eyes wide open, shining with impossible-to-hide greed. "What did you say?" she asked in a trembling voice, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. I didn't look at her. My eyes scanned every house in the room, from the distant relatives to the closest ones, before stopping on Emily and Lucy. "During the years I managed the restaurant," I continued in a firm but cutting voice, "I managed to save a considerable sum, $300,000 USD. I had originally intended to distribute it among my children, Alex, Emily, and also Veronica." The murmuring rose again, this time with a clear tone of mockery. Aunt Carol, who had previously sided with Veronica, now shook her head and whispered to the person next to her, "She still expects to keep a share." Uncle Frank nodded, his gaze full of contempt toward Veronica. I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, which she immediately tried to cover up with a gesture of false fragility. "Ma, you mean that?" she stammered, forcing a rigid smile, but I interrupted her with a firm voice without the slightest hesitation. "But after everything I've seen, everything I heard in Lucy's video, I will not leave a single penny to those who dared to insult my daughter and divide this family." I paused, looking directly into Veronica's eyes so she would feel the firmness in every word. "I have decided. All that money will go only to Alex and Emily. Veronica and Mason will not receive a single coin." The room seemed to explode. From a corner of the table where Uncle Frank was sitting, a brief but resounding applause was heard. "Pure justice," he said enthusiastically, his eyes shining as if he had just witnessed an act of true fairness. The other relatives nodded. Some even stood up and applauded loudly. Emily beside me burst into tears, but this time not from humiliation. She took my hand tightly and whispered, "Mom, thank you." Lucy, my little granddaughter, looked up at me, her eyes shining with pride. "You're incredible, Grandma," she said with her childish voice, but full of emotion. Veronica collapsed in the chair, her face pale, as if all the life had drained out of her body. She opened her mouth, trying to say something, but not a sound managed to come out. Mason, standing next to his mother, suddenly yelled, full of fury, "That's not fair! This house is also my mother's and mine. You don't have the right to do that." He stamped his foot on the floor, his eyes blazing as if ready to confront the whole world. Alex, who was nearby, immediately approached, pointing his finger at his son's face. His voice was icy. "Your grandmother and father decide about this house. You have no right to yell at your elders like that." Then he turned to Veronica with a look full of disappointment. "And you, Veronica? I thought you were a sensible wife, a mother, but you have turned this family into a mockery. I will not forgive what you have done." Veronica burst into tears, but this time it wasn't her usual tearful act. She covered her face. Her shoulders trembled, but no one in the room felt any pity anymore. I looked at her with a mixture of rage and sadness in my chest. Veronica had been my daughter-in-law, the person I once trusted to bring happiness to Alex, but now she was nothing more than a shadow of ambition and cruelty. I turned toward Emily and saw her hugging Lucy tightly, tears streaming down her face, although a faint smile was beginning to appear on her lips. "Ma," she whispered, "I thought I was always going to be a burden, but now I feel like I can start over." Emily's words were like a fresh breeze, easing the wounds she had carried all those days. Lucy, sitting on her mother's lap, lifted her face to me with bright eyes. "Grandma, now Mom won't be sad anymore, will she?" I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "That's right, my love. Grandma, your mom, and your Uncle Alex are going to do everything to make sure you and your mom are happy." The girl smiled, a clear smile like the light of dawn, and I knew that, although many difficulties remained, our family had found a spark of hope. When the guests left, the room fell silent, with only the sighs of those of us who remained there. Alex sat down beside me. He took my hand. His voice, deep but firm, said, "Mom, forgive me for letting everything get this far. From now on, I won't allow anyone to hurt you or Emily again." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread inside me. Alex, my son, had matured more than I imagined, and I knew he would do whatever was necessary to protect his family. In the days following the storm of truth, my house slowly recovered the peace I thought was lost forever. Weeks after that fateful party, Alex and Veronica's divorce was finalized. Veronica, after leaving, never reappeared before us, and I knew she had moved to another city, taking her ambitions that no longer had a place in this family. Mason, my rebellious grandson, was educated strictly by Alex and me. Little by little, he changed. He put aside the hurtful words and the arrogant gaze. I watched him begin to apologize, to help Lucy with small things, even if it was just picking up a pencil or sharing a treat. Although the change was slow, I knew that deep down, Mason was still a child, and I trusted that time would heal the wounds he had caused. At 7, I thought I no longer had the strength to start over, but seeing Emily and Lucy, I found a new energy. I decided to dedicate my time to helping Emily get back on her feet, not just because she was my daughter, but because I wanted her to understand that life always offers opportunities for a new beginning. I started teaching Emily about business and money management, everything I had learned in my years of running a restaurant. At first, she was clumsy and made me laugh. One time, Emily made a mistake giving a customer change. She blushed with embarrassment. Another time, she wrote the accounts incorrectly, and we had to review them until midnight. And how could I forget the first batch of bread, when Emily forgot to adjust the oven, and the entire kitchen filled with smoke? She stood looking at those charred pieces with teary eyes. "Mom, I really am a disaster." I walked towards her, placed my hand on her shoulder, and smiled tenderly. "It's okay, Emily. If you make a mistake, you correct it. You have to learn in any job. I also burned a dozen batches before I could open my restaurant." Emily looked up at me, her eyes shining with a small spark of hope. In that moment, I knew she was ready to move forward. On the day of the inauguration of the small pastry shop, Emily and I were in the kitchen early. The aroma of butter and vanilla filled the entire place. Lucy, my little granddaughter, ran back and forth, helping to clean the tables and carefully hanging the sign she had drawn herself. Lucy's Bakery. The name was Emily's idea to honor her daughter, the girl who brought light to the whole family in the darkest days. Neighbors and friends came in large numbers to show their support, and laughter and conversations filled the entrance of the shop. Emily, in her white apron, blushed with joy every time a customer praised the taste of the pastries. Lucy, proud as a little owner, approached each person with her clear voice. "My mom made these pastries. They're delicious. Try them. We have chocolate ones, too." I stood behind the counter, silently watching Emily wrap the pastries with dedication. Her eyes were illuminated by a happiness I hadn't seen in her for a long time. Each carefully packaged pastry, each smile she gave a customer, was like a confirmation that she was reclaiming her own path. I looked at Lucy, who took a small cookie and put it in the hand of a neighborhood boy, and then smiled at me again. In that instant, I felt my heart warm, as if all the pain of the past days was slowly fading away. Alex, after the divorce, became calmer. He spent more time with the family. There were no more endless business trips or nights at the office. In the afternoons, he often helped me in the backyard, where the flower beds I had planted when he was young were starting to bloom again. He watered each plant carefully while telling me stories from the office. His voice was soft but full of life. One night, sitting around a simple dinner, just the four of us, Alex looked at Emily and said, "Sister, I'm proud of you. You are stronger than I thought." Emily smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her after so many months of darkness. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. At a company meeting, Alex happened to meet Marianne, a sweet and mature accountant. They started talking and slowly discovered shared interests in their daily lives. Marianne often visited the bakery, bringing joy and a warmth that I perceived from the first time I saw her. She would sit with me, talk about her own difficult moments, and I understood that she wasn't just an intelligent woman, but also had a sincere heart. Lucy adored her especially. She would often pull her to a table to show her drawings. "Miss Marianne, do you think this cake I drew looks real?" Lucy would ask excitedly. Marianne would smile, stroke her head, and reply, "Of course, Lucy, you are a very talented artist." One sunny afternoon, I sat behind the counter, silently observing the scene in front of me. Emily was busy wrapping bread for customers, a radiant smile on her face. Alex, standing at the door of the shop, smiled sweetly as he listened to Marianne tell a story. His eyes shone with a peace I hadn't seen in him since his divorce. Lucy, sitting in a corner, was coloring diligently, murmuring a children's song. Mason, though still a bit shy, also appeared to help clean some tables, and the arrogance was no longer in his gaze. I let out a soft sigh of relief, as if I had finally lifted all the weight from my heart. I thought about the days we had left behind, about the wounds our family had to endure. I remembered Emily's desperate look when she called me for help, the times Lucy silently endured Mason's mistreatment, and the moment Alex announced his divorce from Veronica. But now, contemplating the scene in front of me, I knew we had survived the storm. Not only did we get through it, but we found a new life, a place where love and unity conquered all the pain. I stood up and left the shop, where the golden light of the afternoon covered the entire neighborhood. Emily looked at me and smiled. "Mom, we sold a lot of bread today. I think next week I'll try making strawberry flavor." I nodded with pride. "Very good, honey. I knew you could do it." Lucy ran toward me, hugging my legs with her clear voice. "Grandma, our bakery is #1, right?" I laughed heartily, stroking her head. "That's right, Lucy, and you are the best little owner of them all." On a warm afternoon, we sat together in the small bakery. Lucy's cheerful laughter mingled with Emily's soft voice and Alex's deep tone. The rays of the late afternoon sun came through the window, bathing us in a golden glow, as if blessing us with a new beginning. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, after the storm, this family finally found peace. And from now on, I don't have to worry about my children. After all we lived through, I understood something about family. Silence in the face of evil only makes it stronger. If it hadn't been for Lucy's courage, the truth would have been buried, and the cruel people would continue to trample on others, We must stand up to defend what is right, whether we are old or young, because justice is sometimes born from the hearts that seem most fragile. And even more important, love and unity are the greatest strength that helps a family overcome storms, maintain faith, and start over. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identities of the people involved. We do not share this to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can illuminate someone else's path. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.